Hey, we are live here at historic Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky. Normally we'd be in the Nutmeg Tavern, but we're on the road shooting videos. We're going to move up here. We were on the road shooting videos this weekend, so I thought, hey, okay, we might have bad connection, but we're going to do it anyway. So here we are. I've got Brian, I've got Amy, and they're just very involved here at Locust Grove. Tell me a little bit more about Locust Grove.
Okay, well, we at the time we were actually outside of Louisville, Kentucky. It was about an hour and a half, 2 hour ride or walk down there, and so we think they started on the house around 1792, moved in around 1795. It was designed and had built by a man named William Cron, who was an Irish immigrant. He was a Revolutionary War veteran, and he was married to Lucy Clark. And Lucy Clark was George Rogers Clark's little sister.
That's a famous guy.
Yeah, and William Clark's older sister.
Right.
So she was right in the middle of the two of them. And because of that, when George Rogers Clark had a stroke and fell into his fire and lost his leg in 1809, they moved him in here to Locust Grove so his sister Lucy could take care of him. And that was really the cornerstone of our story. When they saved Locust Grove, it was because it was the last home of George Rogers Clark. And then as we went along with a lot of great researchers over the years, we've uncovered all these other stories of the Crons and all the things that happened here over the years.
So we're at the original site. This is the original Cron house, right?
Yep.
And we've got other buildings here. You could probably just see the edge of the kitchen block.
Mm-hmm.
This is rebuilt, right?
Yes, and that's the really neat thing about most of our outbuildings we have out here. The only one that was left original was the smokehouse.
Okay.
Everything else had been torn down, other things built up, newer outbuildings, because it was a working farm from 1792 all the way to 1961. So a lot of things changed over that course.
Right.
And but so the archaeologists started to investigate, and are still investigating where the other buildings were, how they were constructed, what they were used for, then recreating them.
Is the smokehouse still here?
It is. It's right on the far end of the kitchen building.
Okay, so they built onto this from the original smokehouse.
Right.
Okay, so I didn't know that part. We've got a dairy. We've got a woodworking shop.
Right.
There's what's the new thing you got down
the distillery.
Yeah,
So yeah,
distillery.
they had a distillery. William Cron bought his still in 1808. We think that it was located off of what's now our property, because we've got 55 acres left of a 694.5 acre farm.
Yeah.
But so we had that building down there. There was a building that had been reconstructed. We think it was originally a garden shed, and it really wasn't being used for much because it was too far removed from the rest of the action. And so when we decided we were going to do this distillery project, it's kind of an enticing window into the broader story of the small farm economy here. We decided to repurpose that building and put the distillery down there.
Okay. So there's a lot of different things going on this particular site, but you're not a national site or a state site. What's going on here?
Right.
This is a private site?
Well, we're a National Historic Landmark, but not
Right.
a national park. So the property is owned by Louisville Metro, formerly Jefferson County, now Louisville Metro, and it's managed by Historic Locust Grove, Inc.
Okay.
So it's a really nice arrangement. We're managed by our own board. Metro Parks is great support for us and taking care of the property and just kind of giving us all the support that we need to keep this place going. So it's just between Historic Locust Grove Inc. and Louisville Metro Parks. It's just a really wonderful relationship, and together we make this whole thing happen.
If you've got questions, we're gonna pick those up in a few minutes. If you've got specific questions about historic sites, he runs a site, she works at the site as well as doing other things.
Well, I volunteer here.
Right, exactly. Work is volunteering.
It is work.
It is work.
But it's wonderful work.
Right. But I want to touch on just a few more things. Mostly the people that do interpreting here or guides are volunteers, right?
Yes.
So you have a very strong volunteer
We
program.
do. Yeah, we have over 100 volunteers. Always needing more still. It's a big job, but yeah, when you come out to a special event or something, all the people you see giving tours of the house, if you see first-person interpreters out, historic trades demonstrators, things like that, those are all volunteers.
And another thing that's happening here is first-person interpretation.
Right.
And if you're not familiar with first-person interpretation versus other ways, when somebody is dressed up, sometimes at this site, they will be portraying the person in the 19th century as if they're in the 19th century. So instead of somebody saying, oh, it was like this in the time period, they would say, I'm here today and I'm doing how are you today? Just like they were somebody from the time period. That's a tricky thing to do and to do well. Some people react to that well, and other people don't know how to react to that.
Yeah.
So if you've got questions about interpretation, first person versus third person, it's another super topic. Do we have any specific?
I don't have any questions right now. A lot of folks are saying that they live here in Louisville. So
Wow,
if you
great.
do, come volunteer. That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome.
And then a lot of folks have visited here, and even somebody said that they were just here at Market Fair.
Oh, great.
So-
yeah.
that's
So
awesome.
talk about exactly where we are here in Louisville.
Well, this would be the eastern part of
Okay.
Louisville. And like I said, when Locust Grove was built, Louisville was just a tiny little town.
Right, yeah.
And so, yeah, there was an expanse between here and there, but over time it grew to incorporate this area. So this is the east end of Louisville, along the Ohio River.
Yeah, almost see the river. over
Yeah,
there.
the property used to go to the river, and really, now that we have cars, if
We got
traffic
the hop, skip, and jump.
yeah, it's like 12 minutes from the heart of downtown. So really, we're not far from the action, even though we've got these 55 acres of beautiful landscape.
Yeah, and it is an amazing, beautiful house. There's been a lot of work in restoring it to what it was. Right.
Yeah, we just had a new restoration a few years back. They restored it in the 1960s first,
Yeah.
based on the best research they had at the time. And then as time moved on, new technology, new techniques, new documentation came to light. And so we had a grant from an anonymous foundation to have microscopic research done on all the surfaces of the house, and then to implement that research if we wanted. So wherever you see wallpaper now, we know there was wallpaper there. Every paint color we know is correct, and that was also an opportunity to incorporate all of the research that had happened
Since that
that
time.
first
right.
restoration.
Yeah. So yeah, those restorations can be, sometimes a very good thing and sometimes very damaging. Things that happened in
Yeah.
the 60s or 70s
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
right.
But luckily, everybody who's been through here has been really conscientious.
Right.
No corners have really ever been cut, and so we kind of try to carry on that mentality.
Hey, tell us about your role here.
Oh,
While you're on that, some
Yeah.
folks you can tie this in. Some folks are wondering about the research that goes into building an interpretive role.
oh my
go.
goodness.
Talk about that, yeah.
Wow. All
Yeah.
right. So we talked about there's the difference here between first-person interpreters and third-person interpreters. I talk about third-person first, actually. That's the folks who are out of character. And we do have some really fabulous people who come here who have just really researched a particular trade, like bookbinding. One of our volunteers has learned period bookbinding, leather making. And part of the reason that we have people stay in third person for that is so they can actually talk about the research. First person, a lot of what we really do work on is making sure that people do have sort of meat to talk about, that it's not just, oh, good day, sir. So a lot of what we work on is first people learn the history of Locust Grove. They learn who the people were who lived here. We have them go through the transcriptions of the letters. We have them study period language. And if you join the first person program, you actually go through an audition process, and we actually have a required number of workshops that people need to go through before they're just thrown out there.
It's a
we have-
scary thing.
It
to
is.
do.
No, it
Yeah.
is. And we have workshops and rehearsals where we really practice. Some of us will pretend to be the public. Some of us will come through. And we try to create a really safe space in our rehearsals where people kind of feel comfortable trying and failing and getting comfortable until they go out there for real. But honestly, if you're doing a first person interactive, you will also be surprised how much you can learn to guide conversation to what you do know. If you learn a few talking points and you're very strong and good at reaching out, the first time I was out as the character I portray, we still didn't know her children's names, but I knew she had children. We've since found them. So I spent all night talking about my kids. I just never let the conversation get to what their names were.
I don't know what it is. I forgot.
So when you're doing first-person interpretation, is it hard to separate fact from your personal opinion while you're playing that role?
Oh, that's a really great question. As much as possible, you start with the facts and then you try to make interpretive decisions. I can give you a great example. My character, I portray a woman named Amelia Clark, completely different Clarks, other side of the family. Her husband owned a newspaper, and there's just a few things in that newspaper that show me this guy had a really kind of, today we would say, snarky sense of humor. So I realized, I don't know her personality for sure, but she either was probably annoyed at him all the time, or she had a really good sense of humor. So I've chosen to just play her as, very calm sense of humor. She had 5 boys in 1816. I assume sort of constant chaos around her.
So you definitely have to take what you get and
Yes.
work with it and try not to put too much modern in it. But,
Yeah.
but they were regular people like we are.
Exactly.
So we have to bring in that at the same time.
John, can you say hi to Pine Pie?
Pine pie. Hi, I don't know how do you say hi pine pie, but hello.
Yeah, it's their one wish.
Welcome to the live stream.
A lot of people are commenting and saying that your hat is very macaroni.
It is.
Too true. So the I was thinking about first person and thinking about what that does for the person who's doing the interpretation.
Yeah.
So we kind of think of it as the audience receiving it, but how do you think it changes the person who's doing the first person interpreting?
Well, the first thing I would say is our goal for everyone coming through here, and I think also for the person doing it, is that you need to remember that we have the benefit of hindsight. And these people lived things moment by moment. They did not know what was coming next. And there's a certain uncertainty that comes with that. There's an excitement. But just kind of remind us that we don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
For example, we portray 1816. That's known as the era of good feelings. The Federalist Party had died during the last war. We say, oh, isn't it so great? There's no more political division in this country. It's so
only
wonderful.
going to go up.
And 1816 is a lovely place to be sometimes.
Yeah.
War of 1812 is just over.
Right.
British goods are flooding our market openly again, so a lot more access to.
We just had the steamboat coming through
Yeah.
at that time.
Sorry, not only we just had the steamboat coming through, it came down in 1811. It was the Enterprise steamed back up, right? The Enterprise came back up from New Orleans the year before we portrayed. And so if you think about the way that just revolutionized the exchange of information, the exchange of goods, and the possibilities in these people's lives,
It'd be like a super highway just came through town.
Right, yeah.
Something else I think we try to do is not be hokey as much as possible. We try to take these people seriously, and for example, I love it when somebody asks me like, oh, you can't vote or something like that. As a woman, they bring up voting, and I say, well, yes, it's amazing. My husband can vote.
Right.
If we lived in England at our income level, he wouldn't be able to vote.
Right.
It's lovely.
Our family has a say in
Yes.
government rather than our family doesn't have.
Exactly, and for an 1816 mindset, this is a real evolution.
Progress.
This is progress. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
My sisters in England don't feel like that.
Yeah. How about questions, right?
Oh, there's a lot. There are a lot of comments on sideburns too.
We knew it.
So some folks are wondering about what kind of education should you pursue if you want to get into reenacting historically, especially in a professional manner. And second is, what about the cost investment to get involved with that sort of a hobby?
Those are big questions. I work here at Locust Grove. Amy actually is a teacher, and so we both have degrees in history. And the big thing, there's not a formula to just turn a key and you're going to get in. I just realized at some point that if I ever wanted to have a prayer of working in the field, I needed to start saying yes to everything. And just be as well-rounded as possible. And my boss, Carol, who's also one of my professors, she said that it's important to have something different about you, to specialize in something, to stand out in some way. And it just takes a lot of perseverance, a lot of doing stuff for free, a lot of being broke. And so that's, I think, one answer to that. Do you have any more thoughts on that?
Well, look, don't get into reenacting because you want to make money.
Right.
Let's put that out there right now. If you're ever able to get a paying gig out of it to recoup some money, that's delightful. But don't go at this like you're looking for a job or profession. If you come at it as, I've been doing this for years, I love it, I have to do something for a living, is there a way I could turn this into my living? That's great, but that's still first coming from a place of love. I do this because I love it.
Yeah. If you don't love it, there's no point, because there's things you can do that are less work and make you more money.
Right. So, but there are opportunities for volunteering.
Oh, yes.
And lots of people get involved in that way, and that does not take any special education.
No.
Sites like this will give people the education they need to be an interpreter.
Same thing for everything else we do out here. Our docents go through training here as well. You go through tours with lots of people. You're given all these materials. You actually take a tour with the curator where you're giving the tour before you go out with the public.
Right.
A lot of sites will have training programs worked in. And actually, living history aside, I wanted to put something on what Brian was saying. I love living history, obviously, but you don't realize the sheer number of amazing skills from volunteers that go into a place like this. You wouldn't think of it, but I think some of our most valued volunteers are the guys who figured out the most efficient way to park cars in that field.
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, we love them. We worship that.
Right.
Because they just had those great analytical skills to say, no, we can fit 10 more cars over here if we do it like this. And
Everybody fits in a historic site like
Yeah.
this.
Okay, real quick, there are a lot of newcomers. Where are we at and why are we here?
We are at. I'll let you do it.
Oh, we are at historic Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky. We're a National Historic Landmark. We've got 55 acres, and we're a historic house museum. And so what we're doing out here today is we've got a recreated hearth kitchen. So it's like it was 200 years ago, but it's not 200 years old, so we can use it. And so a couple times now, John's come down, a couple of Townsend guys have come down, and we've shot a few videos. Of
Yeah,
some-
we're shooting videos this weekend, but we thought while we were here we'd do this live stream because we didn't want to skip a Friday.
So does anybody have a clue on how much a Hudson Bay blanket coat would have cost in the time period?
In the time period,
Honestly, I do
The-
not.
generally the cost of the blanket, and they, depending on where Hudson Bay, generally we just think of blankets as blankets, not necessarily Hudson Bay. That's sort of like a brand name that gets big in the 20th century, but they use things like match coats, which started out as just a blanket that you wore as like a big shawl, and then later on that was cut into like a great coat, things like that. But if you're just wearing it like a blanket, then it's just the cost of the blanket.
All right, so they asked us, what sort of an outreach do you have to children in the community?
Well, we have. Oh, do you have any thoughts?
cultural pass.
Well, there's Cultural Pass. Louisville Metro does they call it Cultural Pass, and basically they reach out to all the cultural institutions like us in the city. I can't list them all. There's tons of them, but all the historic houses, the museums, the zoo, all those kind of places, and they get into our site for free
During the summer.
During the summer,
Do you have school groups that come through?
all the time. Yeah.
Right.
So,
So school groups, sometimes sites reach out into the local schools. Do you do any of that?
we haven't really found a successful formula for that, but when like some of the colleges have service days, things like that, then some of us will go out and we'll table at those, try to let some younger folks know who we are, what we do, and how they can hopefully help out.
A lot of people are asking about the number of buttons that both of you are sporting on your coats. Is that a class status, having many buttons, is somebody's question?
This is just my regular coat that I made. I think I did actually get these buttons from Townsend, and they were they were sitting
no buttons.
right. Yeah, they were sitting around, and I needed something to button it up with. So.
Right. Well, buttons were an expensive part of your garment, but clothes in general were very expensive. But clothes today are just dirt cheap compared to what they would have been in the time period. Hand stitching, all those things, the cloth took a tremendous quantity of time to make compared to what it does today. And so everything we have on is a status symbol in some way or another.
Yeah.
So the number of buttons, and especially if you have all your buttons, sure, that's a status symbol.
So I'll go ahead and say right now, Locust Grove is in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes.
And thank you, everyone, so much for your donations that are coming in. We're doing this live stream on a cell phone. We don't have all the equipment that we typically would, so I can't read everything off, and I only see like 2 comments at a time. But thank you very much.
Yeah, since we're on the road, our equipment is very small, and so again, I want to thank everyone for your tremendous support of what we do here on the channel. Do you have another question, Ryan?
Somebody, one of the costume interpreters at Connor Prairie just chimed in and said there are opportunities for paid gigs in living history world if you look for them. So yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
A lot of different kinds of sites, private sites, state sites, national sites, local sites. There's a lot of different things going on, and a lot of times they're hidden. They're hidden gems in a community, and people don't know about them. So seek them out if you're interested in that sort of thing. Look for historic sites in your area. If you're interested in, it's one of the best ways to get started in reenacting. If you can't find a local group, look for those historic sites that are close to you.
Let's talk about the connection that this site has to Lewis and Clark.
Okay, Lucy Clark Cron, who was the lady of the house, was William Clark's older sister. So she was younger than George Rogers, older than William. And Lewis and Clark were here at Locust Grove on both ends of their expedition. They were here before they left. They came here when they returned in 1806. I believe Meriwether. They were here together. I think it's the only place still standing west of the Alleghenies. Where they were together after the expedition, Meriwether Lewis moved on pretty quickly. William Clark stayed on for a while, so the Locust Grove kind of bookended the expedition in a way for him.
I can almost see them coming through.
Yeah.
Another question?
I'm waiting.
Yeah, you got to bear with the interface that we've got here.
Yeah, so how do you handle when guests come through and they ask rude questions or questions that could be interpreted the wrong way?
Well, we're really lucky here because we have our fabulous docents, and our docents are just amazing. And we've spent years just developing this really tight relationship with them. So there's usually a docent nearby or in the room that can save you or can help answer questions out of period. Sometimes it's not even rude. Sometimes it's the most frequent is people want to know if the furniture is original to the house or not.
Yeah.
And that my friend over here can tell you that. So we've got, there's so many benefits to somebody in character and somebody who's not, and we are able to really balance that. But we also have docents who've gotten very keen-eyed about when they need to just swoop in and sort of, come this way, sir.
Out you go.
Yes, and we're really lucky in that way.
And how about the controversial topics in your narrative here? How do you deal with that?
We own it. It's part of the story. We're always pushing forward, trying to find out more about it so we can interpret it better. We try to talk to people in the community about how they feel about it.
Is there anybody's life that doesn't have spots where it's like, well, I'd rather not talk about that? But it's like, no, that happened, and like any historic site, they have those things going on, and you just have to. That's part of what's going on.
That's part of the story, and you got to tell that story.
Yeah.
Somebody just said they wish they could send 3 hot cups of tea to you guys.
We appreciate that.
If you're going to do that, please include a 4th.
Yeah. I think it's about 35 degrees.
Something like that.
It's kind of chilly.
Is there any reference in your letters or anything about the earthquake of 1812? Did that touch
There
here?
isn't a reference, but we do know that from other sources that it did affect people out here. So we have used that as a talking point before.
Is the New Madrid fault line close? Where is that?
There were some cracks around here, and actually out in St. Louis, where William Clark was the territorial governor, it was much more destructive. So actually, when I first started researching my character and I didn't know as much about her, I would use that a lot of times as a story and say, I remember when, it woke my children up, but of course out where William Clark was, it was just so dreadful. And I also love those stories because when you're in character, you can use that as a time to slip in if people aren't quite getting what year it's in. You can say, oh my, now how long ago was that? Well, my goodness, it's already 1816 now, so that was 5 years ago. And that kind of can help get some people there with you.
All right. I'm sorry, there are a lot of questions.
I mean, honestly, we probably spend half our time today saying, oh my gosh, how is it already 2018?
Well, yeah.
So I really like to use that as a device when it's supposed to be 1816.
Yeah, time flies because it does.
I really hate to have to reference this too, but sorry guys, we don't have anybody moderating some rude comments this time around because it's just us right here. How about George Rogers Clark? His time here. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, he was here for 9 years. He had a stroke in his log cabin over in Clarksville, Indiana, in 1809. His leg fell in his fireplace when he had the stroke, and he wasn't able to get up. And so they tried to keep him there, nurse him back to health. It was too bad. They brought him to Louisville, to Fanny's house. His youngest sister, his baby sister Fanny, and Dr. Ferguson amputated the leg. And supposedly he didn't make a sound while they did it.
Maybe he didn't have any feeling.
That's what I'm thinking. It might just all been so dead down there. So they moved him into Locust Grove for those last 9 years of his life. They fixed up a ground floor room for him, so he didn't have to worry about too many stairs. And this is where he was. I think 1812 was when Virginia voted they voted him the pension, his annual pension. They voted him a sword. which we have in our museum.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so the sword is well, it's come back here. It was
Right.
away for a while, and he declined in health over those 9 years. He continued to have strokes over the course of the time he was here, and then he died in 1818. We just passed the bicentennial.
And part of his story is Kit. Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about
Absolutely.
Kit.
Well, Kit was the enslaved man who was his personal body servant. So he had to work for George, and he came to Locust Grove with George. And when he died, William Clark, when George Rogers Clark died, William Clark got here about a month and a half later, and he signed the paper setting Kit free. The problem is, after that, there are too many conflicting stories
About what happened.
Yeah, I mean, he was around, and people say they remembered him being around, but there's conflicting stories about where exactly he was, when he was, and all that. So he did go free at that point. We just don't know exactly what he was doing after that.
How about bourbon history at Locust Grove?
Oh yeah.
There's none. Because we hadn't been caught, we hadn't really, it hadn't really turned into what we think of as bourbon yet, but they were making whiskey. It was kind of the roots of bourbon, and that's one of the.
I've got to go check something in the kitchen. I'm
Oh,
gonna
forget,
leave.
yeah.
That stuff burning.
Yeah. So they were making whiskey. It was the roots of bourbon, but it probably wasn't barrel aged. There's still that they had. It was only 66 gallons. That's about
The size of the.
yeah, it's about 50 gallons of mash go in there. If you get 10 gallons of spirit out of that at a time, you're lucky. And so
So they probably made brandy.
they also made
whiskey.
brandy and whiskey, and it was just put into
Jugs.
over jugs.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And they weren't necessarily suffering. I mean, this is the era of punch.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
and also we do know from their account books too that even though they were making their own spirits here,
They were buying
the stuff that they preferred, like
They were
rum and Madeira.
supplementing it.
Yeah.
They want to know what Amy's cooking.
We're working on a peas porridge episode right now. In fact, it's probably all black in the pan. And we're gonna have to start all over.
All right, so how about your character's voice? How do you develop that?
Voice as in their perspective, or
I can only read what they wrote, so you have to interpret that.
Voice. That could be interpreted if you.
Yeah, in terms of dialect
I would
or.
think the personality voice.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's where they're going.
Well, we have everybody read through the letters. We've actually got copies of the letters here digitized. So if you're very lucky, your character wrote a lot of letters that have been preserved. But even if they haven't, reading letters from the time period, even if they weren't written by the person you were portraying, I think can really help you get that voice as much as possible. There is a wonderful book that Williamsburg has also put out on dialects for different characters. Now that is centered on specifically 18th century Virginia. Some of the people who are portrayed here were born in 18th century Virginia, actually, so that's been very useful for them. I know one of our interpreters who put together an enslaved impression. There's actually a whole section on that in the Williamsburg book. That was really helpful for her. But again, read stuff from the time.
Yeah.
Read novels, read letters, get used to the cadence and the way that people were speaking and the words they were using.
And there are some kinds of writing in the time period that are very academic, and there are other ones that you get a feeling for what the talking was really like. You got to seek out the right kind of writing to understand what speech was like versus what written type of literature was like. Another site that does a really excellent job with the dialects is Plymouth Plantation. They're doing all the way back in 17th century, but wow, that's a fun site to visit for that kind of speech.
What year do you portray here?
1816.
1860.
Our core interpretation at the site is 1809 to 1822. It's the year Clark moved in to the year that William Cron.
Indiana statehood, hello.
And yeah, Indiana statehood's in there. Yeah.
Oh, we've had a lot of fun with that one,
Yeah.
especially during 2016.
Yeah, but it was the perfect. When we started talking about where we were going to set this thing, it was kind of the perfect cross section of where the first generation is still around and active, and the second generation is coming of age.
Yeah.
So.
All right, John, you got to talk about your hat. What's your hat?
It's kind of a typical like 1790s to 1800 top hat. They get really popular in that sort of time period. This one's a fur felt hat, the kind that we kind of hand make up at the store.
All right. And then here's one for we've heard John talk about this, but how about you two? How do you think you would fare if you lived in the time period that you portray? Are you too attached to modern life?
Well, I think and you could approach that a couple of different ways. And one way is that living in the time period is not the same as trying to recreate the time period, because you've grown up with the skills that you need and you've developed them gradually, just like we gradually developed using a telephone or anything like that. So I don't think I mean, not that it wasn't hard, but I don't think it wouldn't seem unusual like it does for us to go back and try to recreate that. I don't find myself all that attached to modern
You
stuff.
live 19th century. Tell us right now. I know you do.
I filter as much of the other stuff out. Yeah.
All right, the two very important questions. Well, one's not important, and that is who is the camera guy? I'm Ryan. I'm normally
Ryan,
behind the
that's
bar.
right
Important.
The most important question that's been asked so far is at Locust Grove, where is the nutmeg stored?
There's a vault in the basement where they kept this.
Why do you guys really think that John is here? He is here to break into the vault, obviously.
You brought the nutmeg.
Well, are we ready to wrap?
Yeah, I
this
think
up?
we ought
Our
to.
peas are probably all burnt up in there, so we got to get back into the kitchen, and we want to let you get back to your wonderful day. You can go and watch some other videos, cooking or whatever. I want to thank both Brian and Amy for being here today, as as being a guest here on the live stream. Thank you, Ryan, for being the camera guy, the question guy. He's all of the tech, all at once. Thank you, Ryan. And I want to thank everyone out there for your amazing support for everything we do. And thanks for watching.